My name is Clara Holloway, and for the first 28 years of my life, I believed my purpose was to be a load-bearing wall in the architecture of my family. I was the one you could lean on, the one who wouldn't crack under pressure, the one whose own foundation could be taken for granted because it was simply, always, there. My work, ironically, is in architectural preservation. I spend my days studying the bones of old buildings in Port Blossom, a city perpetually veiled in a soft, silver mist from the Pacific. I analyze their stress points, their histories, the slow, silent compromises they've made with time and gravity. I've always been good at seeing the structural faults in things. Except, for the longest time, in my own life. The phone buzzed again, a low, insistent hum against the reclaimed Douglas fir of my kitchen table. My old smartphone, a Model 3 years out of date, slid a fraction of an inch, as if it, too, were trying to retreat. The screen kept lighting up with names I knew better than my own reflection: Mom, Dad, Leo. A repeating trilogy of obligation. 8 months ago, I walked away from their house in the sprawling, manicured suburb of Oakhaven. There was no dramatic storming out, no slamming of doors. I simply left after my mother, her voice a tight wire of indignation, delivered the final edict: if you walk out that door, don't you dare come back. I turned my back as she said it, not out of defiance, but from a profound and hollow exhaustion. After years of functioning as the family's silent, uncredited executive producer, I had no energy left for a final scene. Now, I was curled in an armchair in my one-bedroom apartment in the Mariners' Quarter. The chair was secondhand, its floral pattern faded, but it cradled me without expectation. Every corner of this place, from the slightly uneven floorboards to the tall, wavy glass windows, felt saturated with a quiet, gentle history that was now becoming my own. No one waited behind the door with a passive-aggressive sigh or a bill they'd forgotten to pay. There was only the soft groan of the building settling, the distant cry of a gull, and the pale, watery sunlight filtering through the persistent coastal cloud cover. The phone lit up again. Mom, for the fourth time. A text message bloomed on the locked screen. Clara, if you have an ounce of love left for this family, please answer. Leo is falling apart. Leo is falling apart. The words were a familiar refrain, the ghost of a song I'd been forced to listen to my entire life. He's sensitive. He needs our support. He's your little brother. Leo, my brother, coddled from his first scraped knee to his current 31 years of unrealized potential. Leo, the aspiring musician who had never written a full song, the filmmaker who had never finished a short film, the artist whose primary medium was excuses. And yet, he always had a new guitar, a new piece of recording equipment, and someone to absorb the consequences of his inertia. That someone, for a very long time, had been me. I used to work 50-hour weeks at a top architectural firm downtown, then drive the 45 minutes to Oakhaven to fix a leaky faucet, grocery shop for the week, and quietly transfer money to cover the utilities. I used to be the good daughter, the responsible one, the one propping up the family facade with her own overtime pay and deferred dreams. I once held the naive belief that if I just worked a little harder, gave a little more, they would finally see me, Clara. Not as a function, but as a person. I was wrong. I flipped my phone to silent and placed it face down. The phantom vibration of it still echoed in my bones, a conditioned response I was slowly unlearning. But it was all right. I was learning how to let it buzz without letting it break my skin. I was learning to sit in the quiet and let their manufactured panic exist in a world separate from my own. The day I left, the sky was a blanket of uninterrupted gray. No symbolic storm, no dramatic downpour. I packed a single suitcase with a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and a heavy, leather-bound copy of The Stones of Venice that a professor had given me in college. It was the first time an adult had looked at me and seen not a helper, but a mind. I locked the front door of that house behind me with the soft, definitive click of a chapter ending. They told me I wasn't welcome back, and for the first time, I was taking them at their word. What they hadn't anticipated was that I would honor their request so completely. That my silence wouldn't be a tactic, but a new state of being. My mother still sent weekly emails, long, rambling monologues of perceived slights and mounting anxieties. My father would occasionally text a terse, guilt-laden proverb, "A family that weathers storms together, stays together." And Leo. Leo had never once apologized. His last message, sent a month after I'd left, was a masterpiece of oblivious cruelty. "I can't believe you'd abandon Mom and Dad like this. This whole family is suffering because of you." Suffering, I now understood, because their primary source of funding and emotional labor had gone offline. I leaned back, feeling the gentle support of the old armchair against my spine. I took a deep, slow breath, inhaling the scent of old wood, dust, and the lavender sachet tucked between the cushions. The silence no longer felt like a void, it felt like clarity. It was proof of my own existence, independent of their needs. Each buzz of the phone was a reminder not of what I had lost, but of the peace I had fought so hard to find. For the past 8 months, I hadn't answered, not out of spite, but as a necessary act of retraining my own heart. I had to teach myself not to respond to cries for help that were, in fact, demands for service. I had grown accustomed to being overlooked, but the feeling of being taken for granted, like a light switch or the hot water heater, was an emotional reality I didn't have a name for until much later. When I was 10, I spent a month building a diorama of a medieval castle for a history fair. It was meticulously researched, with a working drawbridge made of popsicle sticks and thread, and tiny archers I'd painted with a toothpick. I was so proud of it. The night before the fair, I left it on the dining room table to dry. The next morning, I found it crushed. Leo, then 13, had tripped over it while getting a midnight snack. My mother found it first. Her sigh was a cloud of disappointment that filled the entire room. She turned to me, her brow furrowed. "Clara, I told you not to leave your projects lying around where people can trip on them." I stood there, my chest tight. I had been asleep. I had followed her instructions to leave it on the table. Leo was at the kitchen counter, eating a bowl of cereal, his gaze fixed on the TV, as if the wreckage had nothing to do with him. And in our family, it never did. Favoritism in our house wasn't a sudden, violent weather event. It was the climate. It was the air we breathed, the humidity that settled into the walls, slow and pervasive. You don't notice it until you step outside and realize you can finally breathe deeply. My achievements, the dean's list, the scholarships, the prestigious internship, were met with a perfunctory, "That's nice, dear." They were simply what was expected of me, the baseline of my function. Meanwhile, Leo received effusive praise for completing a single online course or showing up to a part-time job for a full week. During my senior year of college, I worked as a barista, waking up at 4:30 a.m. for the opening shift, my hands perpetually chapped and smelling of coffee grounds. I'd rush from work to my classes and then study late into the night at the library for my architectural board exams. Leo, who was finding himself, dropped out of community college because, as my mother explained, the institutional structure was stifling his creativity. I remember coming down with a vicious flu, my fever climbing to 103 degrees. I drove myself to an urgent care clinic because my mother was busy taking Leo to audition for a local band. When he sprained his wrist playing video games, however, my parents rushed him to the emergency room, my mother stroking his hair while my father filled out the paperwork. I received a text, "There's soup in the pantry. Hope you feel better." When I landed my first job at Halstead and Crane, one of the most respected preservation firms in the state, I called home, my voice vibrating with excitement. My father's response was, "Good. Make sure you set up your 401k. But when Leo was featured for 30 seconds in a friend's YouTube video, my mother shared it on every social media platform she used, captioned, "So proud of our talented boy. Big things are coming." For years, I believed that if I just performed my duties flawlessly, the scales would eventually balance. If I caused no trouble, asked for nothing, and proved my worth through sheer, unrelenting competence, they would finally grant me a full membership in the family, not just a provisional one. But I was wrong. One evening, I came home after a grueling site visit, my boots caked in mud, my back screaming in protest. I walked into the living room to find my mother and Leo cooing over a newly framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a professional shot of Leo holding his guitar, looking soulful. The only picture of me in the entire room was a small, faded school photo from the 5th grade, tucked behind a vase. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, waiting to be acknowledged. Neither of them turned. Neither of them spoke to me. No one asked if I was tired or if I had eaten. I went in my room, closed the door, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life outside those walls. I had spent nearly 3 decades in a house I was told was my home, only to slowly realize I was not family, I was infrastructure. I was the plumbing, the wiring, the foundation essential, but invisible and unthanked. The older I got, the more I understood that every compliment they paid Leo was a quiet dismissal of my own efforts. They didn't need me to thrive. They just needed me to provide the stable, well-funded environment in which he could comfortably fail too. The shift from emotional provider to financial provider was so gradual I barely noticed it happening. It started one Tuesday night in March, tax season. I was buried under blueprints and zoning regulations, my eyes burning from staring at a screen for 12 hours straight. My desk clock read 10:52 p.m. The rain was drumming a hypnotic, dreary rhythm against the office window. My mother called as I was packing my bag. "Clara, sweetie, I'm so sorry to bother you so late, but the internet bill is due tomorrow and your father and I are a little short this month. It's only $85. Could you possibly cover it for us? I'll pay you back on Friday." The weariness in her voice disarmed my own. I transferred the money from my banking app before I even reached my car. Friday came and went without a word. That was the first stone. The next week, it was the gas bill. Then the car insurance. At first, my mother's promises of repayment were effusive. "Just a little loan, honey. We'll get it back to you." Soon, that language softened into, well, families are supposed to help each other out. Finally, it settled into my father's terse assumption. Clara's got it. No one ever asked if I did have it. They just assumed my salary was a collective resource. A month later, Leo decided he needed a new MacBook Pro for his sound editing. His credit was non-existent. My mother called me during a client meeting. "Honey, Leo is in such a creative rut. This new computer could be the thing that finally gets him over the hump. He's so talented, he just needs the right tools. Could you co-sign the financing? It's only about $2,200. We'll help with the payments, of course." I knew what "of course" meant. But I said yes. Because back then, I still hadn't learned that love, when weaponized, ceases to be love at all. It becomes a tool of extraction. Within 6 months, I was covering nearly all of the household's core expenses, a sum that hovered around $1,800 a month. I set up automatic transfers from my checking account, an invisible pipeline siphoning away my own future. Some months, when I would gently mention that I needed to save for a down payment on a small condo of my own, my mother would sigh dramatically. "I just never thought you'd be so concerned with money, Clara. We're a family in crisis." One Saturday afternoon, I came home after a long day at work, my arms filled with groceries I had picked up for them: organic chicken, artisanal bread, the expensive oat milk Leo preferred. As I walked in, I saw him lounging on the sofa, playing a video game on the massive flat-screen TV I had helped pay for, a half-eaten pizza on the coffee table beside him. No one offered to help me with the bags. My mother called from her bedroom. "Did you remember to get my lavender-scented fabric softener?" I didn't answer. I just quietly put the groceries away. The only thing in the refrigerator that was mine was a single bottle of sparkling water. That night, I went back to my apartment, opened my laptop, and created a new spreadsheet. I titled it Family Contributions. I created columns for every category: mortgage assistance, utilities, groceries, Leo's laptop, Dad's dental work, car repairs. When I hit sum at the bottom of the column, the numbers stared back at me from the screen. In 1 year, it was over $21,000. I printed the spreadsheet and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Not as a bill to be collected, but as a testament. A reminder to stop lying to myself that this was an act of generosity when, in truth, it was an act of slow, methodical erasure. I started experimenting with the word no. It was a small, foreign word in my mouth. I said I couldn't drive Leo to an appointment an hour away. The result? A tearful call from my mother. "You've changed, Clara. You've become so hard. A text from my dad, you need to remember your priorities. And from Leo, don't act like you're too good for us now that you have a little money. I used to think that if I gave enough, I would become indispensable. But I was learning that the moment I started to keep a small piece of myself for myself, I was treated like a traitor. That night, I lay awake, not with anger, but with a chilling, heartbreaking clarity. I had never been seen as a person with needs and limits. I was a resource. And a resource, once it runs dry, is simply discarded. It was a Saturday in late October, the air crisp with the promise of winter. I'd just wrapped up a massive project, the restoration plan for a historic downtown theater, and had worked through the last 2 weekends. I was bone tired. The kind of tired that settles deep in your marrow. Still, I stopped at the specialty market on my way to Oak Haven. I bought everything on the list my mother had texted me: wild-caught salmon, a wedge of imported cheese, gluten-free crackers, a bottle of Pinot Noir. The bill came to almost $200, none of it for me. The drive to their house felt longer than usual. Each mile closer, the knot in my stomach tightened, a familiar clenching of dread. When I arrived, the house was ablaze with lights. I nudged the front door open with my hip, my arms laden with grocery bags. No one came to greet me. The sound of a sports broadcast echoed from the living room. I set the bags on the granite countertop I had helped them pick out during their last kitchen remodel. The air smelled of lemon polish and something else: tension. My mother appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression grim. "We need to talk." Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth. I was still wearing my coat. "I just got here," I said, my own voice quieter than I intended. "Can I just have a minute to breathe?" "No," she said, her voice sharp. "This can't wait." My father materialized behind her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. Leo, from his throne on the sofa, didn't even turn around, just called out, "Is she here yet?" I clutched the strap of my purse. "What's going on?" My mother sighed, a theatrical exhalation of long-suffering patience. "Clara," she began, as if explaining something to a difficult child, "you have a wonderful job, a stable income. This family is struggling. Your father's part-time hours were cut. Leo is trying so hard to get his music career off the ground, but it takes capital. We think it's time you stepped up in a more significant way." I stood perfectly still. "Stepped up?" "I pay the utilities. I buy the groceries. I've been contributing over $2,000 a month for the last year. What more do you want?" My father finally spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We're talking about real investment, Clara. About family equity." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. "What does that mean?" It was my mother who delivered the blow. "We want you to take out a home equity loan against your condo savings. We need $60,000. The room went silent. The only sound was the drone of the television. $60,000. My entire down payment. The sum of years of careful saving, of lunches packed from home, of declining invitations to go on trips with friends. "For what?" I whispered. "For Leo," my mother said, her eyes shining with a strange, fierce pride. "He has an opportunity to buy into a small, independent recording label. This is his big break, Clara. This could change everything for him." I looked from my mother's pleading face to my father's stoic silence, and then to the back of my brother's head. He finally swiveled around, a look of petulant entitlement on his face. "It's a sure thing," he said. "And it's not like you're using that money for anything important right now anyway." "Nothing important. My future. My independence. My one small piece of the world that was meant to be mine." In their eyes, it was nothing. It was an untapped resource for his dream. A laugh escaped my lips. It was a dry, hollow sound. "The answer is no." My mother's face hardened. "Don't be so selfish, Clara. After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" My voice was rising, a tremor of long-suppressed rage finally breaking through. "I have worked for every single thing I have. I put myself through school, I earned my position, I built my savings. I have been propping this family up for years, silently, without a single word of thanks. And you have the audacity to stand there and call me selfish because I won't liquidate my future for his hobby." "It is not a hobby," my mother shrieked. "What is it then?" I shot back, my gaze locking onto Leo. What have you produced? What have you finished? You live here, rent-free, contributing nothing, while I sacrifice my own life to keep the lights on for you. Silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of it. My father cleared his throat. If you were a truly grateful daughter, you wouldn't see it as a sacrifice. I stared at him, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. In their narrative, I was not the hero of my own story. I was a supporting character in Leo's. My role was to facilitate his greatness. So if I don't give you the money, I said, my voice suddenly calm. Eerily so, I'm not a daughter. No one answered. That was the only answer I needed. I picked up my purse. I walked to the door. The cold night air that rushed in felt like a baptism, washing away years of cloying obligation. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout a final insult. I just paused on the threshold and said, my voice just loud enough to carry, then this house no longer has a daughter named Clara. My final words hung in the air unrefuted. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where a rebuttal should have been. Leo was frozen by the sofa, his mouth slightly agape. My father was staring intently at the scuffed toe of his shoe. And my mother, her expression was one I had never seen before. Not anger, not sorrow, but a kind of flat, cold bewilderment, as if a household appliance had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. Get out, she finally whispered, the words sharp and brittle as ice. If you turn your back on this family, don't you ever come back. I held her gaze for a moment longer. I had an impulse to explain, to plead my case one last time, but I swallowed the words. There was nothing left to say. They wouldn't hear me. They had never heard me. And in that moment, the most profound feeling wasn't hurt, but a strange, startling lightness. I took a step back, my hand still on the doorknob. The porch light cast a long, distorted shadow of me onto the immaculate foyer floor. I turned and pulled the door closed. It clicked shut with a soft, final sound. The sound of a key turning in a lock for the last time. Outside, the autumn air was sharp and clean in my lungs. The scent of wood smoke and damp leaves filled my senses. I walked to my car, my steps feeling steady on the pavement. I got in but didn't start the engine. I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the warm, glowing windows of the house. I had always imagined this moment would be accompanied by a storm of tears, a gut-wrenching agony of loss. But there was nothing. Only a vast, quiet emptiness that felt, miraculously, like peace. It wasn't the emptiness of loneliness, but the emptiness of a room that has finally been cleared of clutter, leaving space to breathe. I drove out of Oak Haven slowly, each street lamp I passed like a punctuation mark in a story that was finally over. A new chapter was beginning, and the page was, for the first time, completely blank. I drove back to my apartment in the Mariners' Quarter without music, without the radio, just the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the tires on the damp road. By the time I reached my building, it was nearly 9 o'clock. I climbed the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment, the old wood groaning companionably under my feet. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The air was cool and still, scented with my lavender diffuser and the old books stacked on my coffee table. I slipped off my shoes, hung up my coat, and walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down in my faded floral armchair. It was only then, in the safety of my own space, that my body began to tremble. It wasn't a tremor of fear or grief, but of release. The unconscious, decades-long tension in my shoulders, my jaw, my stomach, was finally letting go. My body was exhaling a breath it felt like I had been holding since childhood. I looked around my small living room. The garage sale coffee table, the slightly wilting fiddle-leaf fig in the corner, the framed print of a blueprint I admired. It was all humble, all second-hand, all mine. This was my sanctuary. A place with no unspoken rules, no emotional debt, no one to please but myself. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet, family contributions. The final total was $21,342.18. I scrolled to the bottom and typed a new entry in the description column. Severance pay. In the amount column, I wrote, my future. Then I closed the file and moved it to the trash. I didn't need to see it again. The debt was cleared. That night, I slept for 9 uninterrupted hours. There were no dreams, no anxious awakenings to the phantom buzz of my phone. Just the quiet, rhythmic sigh of the old building around me and the steady, even beat of my own heart, finally at peace. In the 3 days that followed my departure, I waited for the barrage of calls and texts. None came. The silence was both unnerving and deeply liberating. I cooked myself a proper breakfast for the first time in months, frying eggs and slicing an avocado, sitting at my small table as the morning light, pale and silvery, filled my kitchen. There was no guilt in the simple pleasure of it, no mental calculation of what this meal was costing me in time or money that could be allocated elsewhere. I began, slowly and deliberately, to build a life that was shaped by my own desires, not by the needs of others. I started leaving work at 5 o'clock. I joined a pottery class on Tuesday nights, discovering a clumsy, surprising joy in the feel of wet clay spinning under my hands. I spent Saturdays exploring the city's hidden alleyways and bookstores, buying novels I'd long wanted to read, but had always deemed too indulgent. I bought a new, vibrant green plant for my windowsill and learned, through trial and error, how not to kill it. In these quiet, solitary moments, I began to reacquaint myself with the person I was before I'd been sanded down into a functional object. The old, familiar silences of my family's home had been charged with meaning, my mother's anger, my father's judgment, Leo's impending requests. The silence in my own apartment was different. It was a blank canvas. It didn't mean anything was wrong, it simply meant that no one needed anything from me. And that wasn't selfish, it was survival. For the first time since graduating college, I was able to save money without it being immediately siphoned away. I opened a new high-yield savings account and named it my own damn house. Watching the balance grow, even by small amounts, felt like a radical act of self-possession. One rainy Sunday, I was curled up with a book when a line seemed to lift itself off the page. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I closed the book, holding that sentence in my mind. I had spent so long believing that family was a synonym for unconditional sacrifice. But I was learning that true support is not a one-way street. You cannot be the anchor for a ship if you are drowning yourself. 8 months passed in this new, quiet rhythm. The calls began on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was in the middle of drafting a structural report. The first was from a number I didn't recognize, which I let go to voicemail. The message was from a Mr. Davies at Port Blossom Financial. It was a sterile, professional inquiry about the property at 1428 Oakhaven Drive. A cold premonition washed over me. I pulled up my old spreadsheet, the one I had moved to the trash but never permanently deleted. I had been sending my parents $500 a month, 1,800 of which, my mother had assured me, went directly to the mortgage. I had done this for over a year before I left. My hands felt cold as I dialed the number for the bank, the one listed on an old statement I found in my digital files. After navigating the automated menu, a polite customer service agent answered. I gave her the address, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Can you tell me the current status of the mortgage on that property? I asked. There was a pause, the clicking of a keyboard. Ma'am, that account is 10 months delinquent. It is currently in the final stages of pre-foreclosure. An auction date has been set for next month. I leaned back in my chair, the office around me fading into a blur. 10 months. That meant they had stopped paying the mortgage 2 months before I left. While they were still taking my money, telling me it was for the house. All those late nights. All the skipped lunches. All the careful, painful budgeting. It hadn't been for the house. It had been for Leo's new speakers, my father's golf club membership, my mother's shopping trips. I hung up the phone, a wave of nausea rolling through me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound, hollow shock. The betrayal was so complete, so audacious, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. Then my own phone rang. It was Leo. I answered, my voice flat. Clara, thank God, he said, his voice laced with manufactured panic. Mom is a mess. The bank is going to take the house. What are you going to do? The question was so absurd, I almost laughed. What am I going to do? Leo, I haven't lived there in 8 months. Don't play dumb, he snapped, his voice turning petulant. You were paying the mortgage. You just stopped, and now this is happening. You have a responsibility here. I took a slow breath. Leo, I called the bank. They said the mortgage hasn't been paid in 10 months. I was still sending you money 10 months ago. Where did it go? A beat of silence. Then a mumbled, I don't know. Dad had some expenses. Mom had to get the car fixed. It was for family stuff. So you used the money I sent for the house on other things, and now you're about to be foreclosed on and you're calling me to fix it? We're your family, he shouted. We're about to be homeless, and you're sitting there in your nice apartment, counting your money. All you have to do is call the bank, make a payment. They'll work with us if you just show good faith. I am not your good faith anymore, Leo, I said, the words tasting like steel in my mouth. This is not my mess. I hung up. 3 minutes later, my mother called. I let it ring. A string of texts followed. Clara, I know you feel hurt. But it was a desperate time. Your father's health. Leo's fragile state. This house is your heritage. You grew up here. You can't let strangers take it. You'll regret this for the rest of your life if you let us end up on the street. I stared at the messages, and for the first time, I saw the mechanism with perfect, chilling clarity. They had never seen me as their daughter. I was their emergency fund, their human insurance policy, a bailout plan for a lifetime of their own poor decisions. I looked at the foreclosure notice I'd later find in my own mailbox, sent to me as a former resident. Then I tore it into neat, deliberate pieces. I could not save a house I had never truly been welcome in. Just as I could never truly be part of a family that saw me only as a function. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 8 months. I called them back. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice a quavering, hopeful Clara. I could hear my father and Leo in the background. She put me on speaker. I just want to ask one thing, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. All that money I sent. Where did it go? My mother stammered. Well, you know, things come up. Your father's prescription costs, and Leo needed. There were just so many things, honey. I meant to catch up on the mortgage. But you didn't, I stated. You lied to me. You took my money under false pretenses and let the house fall into foreclosure anyway. My father's voice boomed through the speaker. Now, listen here. We were in a tight spot. If you hadn't abandoned us when things got tough, it never would have gotten this bad. A dry laugh escaped me. No. If I had stayed, you would have just kept lying. You would have drained my savings, ruined my credit, and when there was nothing left to take, you would have blamed me for not having more to give. After I carried you for 9 months, my mother began, her voice cracking into a sob. This is how you repay me? With this coldness. No, I said, and the word was calm, solid, and final. I am not repaying you with anything. I am done paying, period. I am your daughter, not your financial plan. I am a person, not a safety net. And I am not the excuse you use to avoid facing the consequences of your own choices. You think you're so much better than us, Leo muttered in the background. No, I said softly. I don't. But I'm finally learning to be better to myself. I paused, taking a final, deep breath. I wish you the best. Truly. But from this moment on, you are on your own. I ended the call. My hand was steady. My heart was calm. I opened my contacts list. Mom. Block. Dad. Block. Leo. Block. It wasn't an act of hate. It was an act of profound and necessary peace. I sent one last text to their now-defunct family group chat, a message for the ether. I am not your backup plan. Goodbye. Then I left the group. For the first time in my entire adult life, my phone was completely, blessedly silent. I sat in my faded floral armchair and watched the rain begin to fall outside, the drops tracing clear paths down the old glass of my window. The city lights of Port Blossom blurred into a soft, impressionistic glow. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes, feeling an emptiness that was not a void, but a space. A quiet, clean, well-lit space. A space to build something new. A space to build a home, just for me. I didn't know what story they would tell people, what version of my betrayal they would craft. I only knew that I was no longer a character in it. I was, at last, the author of my own.